All right, everybody, welcome to the next version of Trella Live. I didn't go live last week, but went live. We're going live this week. New time, 7:30 p.m. versus 11:30. So I'm going to give just a few moments for people to get the notifications in YouTube and let all that stuff kind of trickle through, so that we can um, get some people watching. And if you are the type of person that loves to comment, please do. We can see your comments and we can respond to your comments on the fly. And I'm saying we because today I am not by myself. I actually have a guest, a special guest, Eric Casey from Burn After Reading. He is a Massachusetts resident, somebody that has been very active in the cannabis industry and has created a blog, Burn After Reading, that I listen, well, not watch, but rather read. Um, have been checking it out for probably the last maybe like 3 months or so, and finding it to be an incredible resource for me. So I wanted to bring Eric on so that more people can know about what he's doing, subscribe, and there's a bunch of shit going on. So we want to allow Eric to speak to that because he's really heavy into it and he can cover a lot more details than I can for sure. So um, we're gonna we're gonna do that, and then but before we go into that, before we get into that, we're going to talk about the grow trial update, the plant that you see on the screen behind me. Some of you have been watching and the progress of this plant over the past several weeks. So I want to make sure that we definitely touch base on the plant. So stay tuned. We're going to go over grow trial updates. We're going to intro Eric Casey from Burn After Reading, and we're going to get into some industry topics. So just stay tuned, just a couple of minutes. All right, let's get started. Let's get started. So, welcome back to the next Trella Live. For those of you that are just joining in, we go live every week. We usually go live at 11:30 a.m. on Mondays, but switching it up and trying it for 7:30 p.m. to see if this is a little bit more doable for some of you. I know that during the work, during the earlier times, people are working, they're busy. So, hoping that you get a chance to sit and chill with us at 7:30 versus 11:30 a.m. What I wanted to do today is a couple of things. We've got a special guest. So I'm going to intro in our special guest, Eric Casey from Burn After Reading. But before we get into that, I wanted to show everyone an update on the grow trial. For those of you that are uh, watching this grow trial, this is Raspberry Parfait behind me. She originally started above my desk. I was growing this plant in my office on a rack above my desk, and that space that I had was very limited in height. I had a really short space. I had less than 3 feet, 33 inches to be exact. So what I wanted to do is to show everybody how we can grow one plant sideways in that really short, tight space, to the point where you get one plant to look like this. And this is a 2 foot by 4 foot grow tent. So I've got one plant filling out this 2 by 4 space, and I'm excited to show you how she looks. But right now you can see we're in flowering week. I call it 2.5, just somewhere between week 2 and week 3. By Friday, officially, she'll be in week 3. And I'll lean the camera in just a little bit so that you can see how she looks. Try to move it around a little bit for you. But she's coming in very nicely. Really happy with Raspberry Parfait. First time growing Raspberry Parfait. So didn't quite know what to expect in regards to how she would grow, how she would fill the space, how much she would stretch. So it's been a true learning experience for me with Raspberry Parfait, first time going through it. But for those of you that are wondering, all right, well, what's the big deal? It's just, cannabis plants. We've seen that before. Well, this is what she looked like before. The fence at those, you can see there. Let me mute this. So this is our plant training system. It's called TrellaGro LST. The LST stands for low stress training. And this is a little video that I did demonstrating how we use TrellaGro LST. So the goal, the point of TrellaGro LST is to take that top of the plant and to move it sideways slowly over time. So that top of the plant gets moved sideways. When I zoom out on this video, you'll be able to really see what this looks like. Let me see if I can back it up just a bit and pause it. Boom. There we go. So this was the plant in its very beginning stage, very beginning. Just moved her for the first time. So you can see this is the same plant that you're seeing on my screen right here. Same plant, Raspberry Parfait. And what we did is we put her in TrellaGro LST, and this plant is going up into this green ring, and you'll see that shortly as I play the video. You'll see that the top of the plant is extending up into this green ring, and there's this white kind of like collar. We call it a shroud. Some people call it a collar, but that white collar is designed to move that plant sideways over time. You could do it manually by hand. You can move this whole apparatus manually by hand. It's very simple, very easy to do. You only move it like a quarter of an inch at a time. Or you could upgrade to our automated version where it does it for you. But the goal is just to move that top of the plant sideways over time until you fill out this whole entire space. And then you let all the branches, the side branches that are now able to stretch up towards the light, you allow them to do so. So let me just press play a little bit so you can see what this looks like. You see I'm pointing at that shroud there, that collar. That's what moves the plant sideways. That's the top of the plant poking through that green ring. So what I'm doing is I'm demonstrating to users, people who have a TrellaGro LST unit, the proper way to know when to move your unit if you have the manual version. If you have the automated version, it does this for you. It identifies the top of the plant, and it will move the entire carriage accordingly, depending on how fast your plant is growing. If your plant is growing fast, it does it fast. If it's growing slow, it does it slow. So this is what we did over a series of several weeks. It was about 44 or 45 days for us to move the plant from one side all the way to the other. So that is the very beginning stage. For those of you that just joined, she looked like that at the beginning stage. This plant here, Raspberry Parfait, is the same plant that you're seeing right here. This is her in her early veg phase. And let me now show you what she looked like in her later veg phase. And leaves off. There we go. Go to the following station. See that you're 33 inches. So you can see there, I'm saying, you can see there, this is the plant growing above my desk. As I mentioned, I put a rack system above my desk. I had my desk underneath, the rack above. I only had 33 inches of vertical space to work with, and I just moved that plant sideways until I got done with the veg phase, and she started to stretch up towards the lights. Then I took that plant and put it here in my grow tent where I had a little bit more height. I've got about 50 inches of height here because like I mentioned before, this is the first time I'm growing this strain, Raspberry Parfait. Had no clue how much she was going to stretch. Understood supposedly that she's a stretcher. So I wanted to give myself just about a few more, about 16 inches more of space to allow for that stretch. And you can see now she went from this version to what she looks like right now here on the screen in her flowering mode at week 2.5. So that's the goal. The goal of TrellaGro LST is to grow one plant as big as possible. There are lots of people out there that know how to scrog, know how to LST by hand, and that's great. That's excellent. That's kind of how I started too. But I was traveling a lot, couldn't keep on top of my plant, and wanted to come up with a way to do it, easier, to be more automated so that I could do what I need to do, travel, and then come back and not worry about the fact that my plant is growing into my lights, or that I'm not getting the most yield from my plant because I'm not able to maintain that nice uniform canopy. So we decided to come up with TrellaGro LST, and several years later, this is what we have. So if you're interested in learning more, We've got a comment here. Let me check in on that. But thanks for coming through, Frost Kid. Appreciate you. Um, yeah, so you're familiar with this. You've seen, this process. I know you and I have had a chance to actually talk and discuss. And for people like you, Frost Kid, and other people who might be growers who grow not just for yourselves, but maybe you grow for other people. Stay tuned, because we're putting together something really nice and cool for people who consider themselves to be caregivers. These are people who specifically grow to give, not grow for money or grow for profit or grow, to make ends meet. No hate, no shade, but we're right now looking for people who grow to give, overgrow and share. So if you're in that framework and you're trying to figure out how can you get your hands on a TrellaGro LST model when you don't really grow for profit, and maybe you feel like you can't afford to get your hands on something like this, we got you. We're figuring something out. So please stay tuned. And you'll be able to, possibly get your hands on one of these units for a free or at a really, really reduced cost. But we're working all that out. So stay tuned for more, so that we could try to get this in the hands of caregivers, whether you be a licensed caregiver or a quote unquote caregiver. Those are the people that we're looking to serve. So this is how she looks now. Let me zoom out so that you can see again how the flower is coming in at about week 2.5. And we'll be going live every week, so you'll be able to see the progress week over week over week. So stay tuned for more, please. All right, now what I wanted to do was something a little bit different than what we've done before. I haven't had the chance to have guests lately. When I was doing lives maybe about a year and a half or 2 years ago, I was doing a podcast, had a lot of guests come on, which I love. I love having a guest as a part of this, because it creates more of a conversational situation. I get to learn a lot. I basically invite people on that I feel like know a lot more than me, so that I can interview them, learn, and allow the audience to learn as I'm learning. So whenever I invite somebody on, it's always someone that I either look to as a resource, or somebody that I look up to, or someone that's done something that I'm trying to do, or that I just admire what it is that they're doing. So this individual that's coming on, let me bring him up. Here we are, Mr. Eric Casey from Burn After Reading. Welcome to Trella Live.
Thank you, Asia. That was a very kind introduction. I really appreciate the kind words, and I love the work you do as well. And the Raspberry Parfait looking great right now.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and appreciate the comments coming in too. I believe this this is one of the cannabis is the only plant that I'm really, really good at growing. I'm learning how to grow other plants. And I'm growing okra, and I'm growing Scotch bonnet peppers, and trying to get into different types of plants that I'm growing. So Frost Kid, I know that I knocked on your informational door to ask you, how do you cook with your Scotch bonnet so that your rice and beans don't get too hot. And just to let you know, I tried it out this weekend. I put that little Scotch bonnet pepper in there for about 40 minutes and took it out so that the seeds wouldn't get in there and get too hot. And it came out really nice, sweet, smoky flavor. So I appreciate you for that. And some bell pepper too. Got you. But yeah, Eric, getting back to you. So Eric Casey from Burn After Reading is here. He created a blog. When I first saw, Eric, that you created a blog, uh, I jumped on right away and was like, I'm reading this. Because I kind of knew, I don't know you very well, but I know of you, and I've been able to kind of see your progression through the industry. I think when you and I first connected, you were working with Forefront Ventures. I think I connected through Corey Ravelson a little bit, and Corey actually was somebody who helped me think about the idea of TrellaGro LST. So mad props and mad love to Corey Ravelson. But I knew that you were a part of Forefront Ventures. We had a limited, interaction, but I go off of energy from people a lot. And I just got like a really genuine feel from you, like right off the bat. So when I saw that you were doing this Burn After Reading blog, I thought to myself, this is going to be some good stuff because I think he's going to look at it from an unbiased perspective, and give us the stuff that maybe other people aren't thinking about. And I had not been disappointed. But you want to why don't you intro yourself just a little bit, and then we can jump into more of your background and talk about why you decided to create Burn After Reading.
Yeah, well, that was a very kind introduction, and you covered some of it. But yeah, as you said, I'm the founder of Burn After Reading Media. I mostly do it through my Substack, which you can find at burnafterreading.blog. And yeah, I've been in the cannabis writers journalism space for the past 2 years. But before that, I was in the industry from about 2014 until about 2022-ish. So quite a long time, mostly here in Massachusetts with Forefront. But yeah, I'm happy to go into my whole background and kind of how I ended up in the cannabis media space. It's funny, when I originally applied to college and got in, I was originally a journalism major. And that was right when everybody was telling everybody that journalism was about to die, and even my school was telling me, you should major in something else as well on top of journalism. So I got kind of scared away from that space. So it's kind of funny how I've come full circle and kind of come back to that space in a weird sort of way. So yeah, but thank you for having me again.
Yeah, and thanks for persisting. I mean, even when your school is telling you, that must have been kind of a hit.
Yeah, that was enough to scare me away from it. So yeah, sure.
Yeah. But you also did some stuff with MCR Labs too. So
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like you've seen the regulation side, you've seen the operational side of things, you've seen the lab side of things. You just had so many different perspectives. So when you're writing these blogs, you have a different insight maybe than some other people who just get hired to write about a cannabis topic. Do you feel like you've got kind of a different perspective as well? And is that part of the reason why maybe you decided to start Burn After Reading?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I noticed in a lot of other spaces, there's a lot of former people who kind of work in an industry or a space and then go on to write about it. I think the cannabis industry for a long time wasn't old enough for that to happen, really. So I'm kind of the first generation who's been in it. Like, I've worked in the cannabis industry my entire adult life, right out of college, basically. It's kind of all I'd known. So to jump into the space, I thought, it was kind of a unique opportunity because I've seen, everybody from, the late Anthony Bourdain, what he did for the restaurant industry and kind of the chef world, and kind of exposing that to the greater public. There's a lot of great sports writers who formerly were involved in that industry and have moved on to the media space. So I kind of want to do the same thing with cannabis and bring some of the knowledge I picked up and all those years in the industry and kind of share it with the general public and kind of show them what this industry is all about, because it's really kind of hard to fathom from the outside a lot of the time.
Yeah, for sure. And you're tackling some heady kind of topics. Sometimes you're covering MSOs, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. The Cannabis Control Commission. And are you getting any pushback? Are you getting any, hey, can you not talk about those types of things? I don't know what it might be to be a journalist, so I'm wondering, what is it like when you're breaking these types of stories that may or may not put a company in great, light?
Yeah, not too much. I mean, I guess maybe a little silence from people, from some people who used to talk to me more. But I try. There really hasn't been too much pushback per se. I try to be fair, and I try to just provide it from my perspective. And with MSOs, I think I try to capture those nuances too. I think we'll get into this a little bit. But it's certainly a big space, and as the industry evolves, I think that terminology we use, I'm as guilty as anybody. I use that term all the time, but I think it's going to have to start to evolve as well. It's like, I think we're seeing right here in Massachusetts, some of our favorite local brands are starting to expand to other states as well. So when we say MSO nowadays, things are pretty complicated. So I try to always capture those nuances. Obviously, I'm an opinionated person. When it comes to workers' rights, when it comes to some of the impacts of companies that are trying to form a monopoly or an oligopoly in this industry. But at the end of the day, I try to be fair.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I mean, I think, to be honest, from my perspective and what I think about the industrialized or commercialized aspect of the industry is, I kind of fell out of love with it maybe about 3 years ago, when I started to see that it really took a left, in my opinion, and pushed out a lot of the people that I think were grassroots activists that wanted to have some participation in this industry and just were struggling to stay, involved. Some people got moved into the hemp direction. And unfortunately, in Massachusetts, that did not pan out very well for a lot of hemp farmers. So people that I kind of connected with when I first got into the industry are struggling and just not having a good turn at getting, a good foundation within. And the more that I thought about it, I thought, I don't know personally for me that this plant should be commercialized and capitalized the way that it is. And especially when you're talking about large operations, large cultivation centers, one company kind of being the funnel for all of the product that we see, concerns about what's in the cannabis, whether or not you're getting real true lab results. There's just been so much concern that I've kind of turned my head and said, I'm going to focus on home grow, and any regulation or any law that does not include home grow, I'll push back on. But past that, I kind of stay out of it. So some people may wonder, they used to see me at events and see me out a lot more active in that kind of commercial capitalist events, but I've decided to pull back and to try to focus more on the people and the home growers and the medicine, and trying to get this medicine into as many hands as possible. But from what you've seen when it comes to, your journalism and your research and what you've been writing, is there hope for the commercial cannabis industry when it comes to those grassroots people that, kind of wanted to see this and put a lot of effort from an activism perspective to try to get involved?
I certainly hope so. At this point in the industry, we're still state by state, so I think some states are in a lot better shape than others when it comes to that. But I think in general, we've seen, especially in the most recent couple of months, in kind of these overall industry struggles and some downturns, it's really impacted some of the larger companies more so than the smaller companies. So I think we're quickly learning that customers care about quality. It's not going to be just a race to the bottom in terms of prices and growing cannabis as cheaply as possible. So I think cannabis consumers are unique. And I think this whole discussion kind of touches upon one of the core aspects. If I could boil all my work down to a central kind of thesis, I would say it's really all about, holding this industry to a different standard, because we have a unique opportunity here. It's brand new industry. So I think there's a lot of people that are coming into the space right now who are trying to make it like every other industry. I really push back against that and challenge us to actually hold ourselves to a higher standard. Not only in terms of how we treat workers, but how we treat the environment, how we treat the plant, and just how we kind of treat cannabis culture as well. And I don't think that's too much to ask when you consider how much potential revenue is out there for companies. So, I think that's really what it comes down to. I think a lot of the times when I talk about these issues, people bring up other companies in other spaces and be like, look what Walmart's doing, look what this company's doing. And but I think at the end of the day, we should be holding ourselves to a higher standard. So I think there still is hope. I think there's still a lot of people out there that believe in these concepts. And I think in the last few years in particular, we've seen regulators in states and also, lawmakers in different states, but also on Capitol Hill, understand the nuances of this issue and understand beyond just being pro legalization, you have to be pro social equity, pro home grow, and pro craft cannabis too. So, I think there's still hope. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do know that there've been, some inklings of co-op licenses and thinking, along that more community centered framework to allow people to get into this. And I hope to see more of that. But I know you wanted to talk about the MSOs. I know, that's a very broad term. So maybe we do need to figure out a different terminology for that, because people are expanding. But when you think of MSOs, what is it that you'd like to share with the audience, the Trella Live audience?
Yeah, so I think we had pretty big news today, actually, with the Cresco Columbia Care merger that was supposed to happen. For those who aren't familiar too much with the MSO space, Cresco is one of the bigger. I think I have the list right here. I believe they're up here somewhere in terms of being one of the largest companies in the cannabis space. Same thing with Columbia Care. And this potential merger between them would have created what was believed to be the largest company in the cannabis space in terms of market cap. And this deal was also had a third party involved, Diddy, who was supposed to get some of the licenses for these companies in states where this merger would have resulted them in having too many licenses, more licenses in that particular states allowed. So we saw this in Massachusetts in particular. If this deal had gone through, Diddy would have owned the Sunnyside dispensary right here in Worcester and another one nearby in Leicester. So it was a pretty complicated deal. All these mergers require federal approval, which is obviously tricky for cannabis companies, and they also require state-by-state approval. And it just, by the time they're ready to actually pull the trigger on this deal, the cannabis market had really changed over the past year. So both parties decided to pull out. So that's where they're at, and it just kind of shows the headwinds that a lot of these large MSOs are facing, really, in the space. So.
Yeah, I know a lot of them have been, missing their projections by a lot, and not making the profits that they anticipated. And so I'm not surprised to see that merger didn't, go through.
Yeah.
I do wonder, exactly why and who was the one that kind of pulled the plug. I wonder how involved Diddy was and all that. And I don't know that we'll ever know, but it's a sign of the times. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's even interesting. I was looking at this list before we talked in terms of the market cap and some of these MSOs, and something I think people should keep in mind. Going off that point earlier is, you look at the number one company in terms of market cap. It's Curaleaf. They're at 2.69 billion, and then TrueLeaf, who's a pretty big name too, is at 0.8 billion. So when you do the math, you could fit 3 TrueLeaves into Curaleaf in terms of the market cap. And then when you look at some of the smaller MSOs too, like Air Wellness, in terms of their market cap, you could fit about 10 of those within one TrueLeaf. So, it's kind of crazy. I mean, all these companies have such a large share in some states in terms of the overall market share. And, some of them are pretty common names in the cannabis space that we're familiar with. But even in the time, in terms of the size of these MSOs, it's shocking how big some of them are compared to the others, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that. So Curaleaf, you said you could fit 3 TrueLeaves into a Curaleaf.
Right.
And
In
was
terms
it?
of market cap, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and about
crazy.
10 Air Wellnesses into TrueLeaf.
Into a
So
Curaleaf. Wow.
yeah,
Into
so
Curaleaf.
yeah.
Interesting.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. But that makes me think, I know Curaleaf, no, sorry, that's GTI and TrueLeaf, unfortunately, had some deaths in their facility
Mm-hmm.
in the pre-roll section. And I know that they're still trying to figure out exactly what the cause was. And I do believe that we need to put more research into figuring out what's going on in those facilities. But it's just upsetting to know that they've got such huge market cap, to set aside a little bit of money to do that research, to get those respirators, to protect the labor force. It's disappointing, and that's, I think, where we see the cannabis industry mimicking the old mistakes that typical industry has done. I mean, we've been pushing back from we had to push back for 12-hour work days to 8-hour work days. You had to get rid of child labor back in the 1800s and 1900s. It's not new that the people, the labor, have to push back and sometimes, unfortunately, physically resist to get protected. And I just hope that we don't have to get to that point in this industry. I don't know if there's been any new news about those deaths at GTI and TrueLeaf.
Yeah. So, the GTI death was, pretty fairly recently. We haven't had too many more details come out about that, but the shocking thing that I noticed with those 2 deaths were the similarities in terms of both of them working the pre-roll department, both of them being lung or breathing related, and then having workers at both of those facilities talk about cannabis dust, particularly in the pre-roll room, particularly dealing with some sort of large industrial scale cannabis grinder. That is kind of kicking up what's described as this dust. It's, I've heard it compared to kind of if you empty a lawnmower bag, that kind of dust that kicks up. It's very lightweight. It gets into the air. It irritates people's lungs. People have reactions to it. And this is something we're hearing across the industry. It's really because we haven't seen pre-roll production quite done like this at this scale, certainly. Before, it's just fairly recently, we're talking in the last decade or decade and a half, that we've seen companies kind of producing pre-rolls at this kind of volume. And I'm afraid the health ramifications haven't been really fully investigated, and that the regulations haven't caught up either. So it really feels like OSHA in particular is playing catch up with this issue. They've had to rely on state regulators for a lot of knowledge because they just weren't knowledgeable in the space before recently. So we've seen a number of OSHA violations at some of the larger MSOs. GTI's had a few. TrueLeaf has also had a few. So it's a huge issue in the space, unfortunately, and it's something that a number of workers are starting to speak out about.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard the term brown lung. I'd never heard of it until I started hearing about these stories. No one ever mentioned that term to me. Is that something that specifically, just for my awareness, is that something that specifically came out of the cannabis industry, the term brown lung, or is that something that's been around before and it got adopted into the cannabis space?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure about the history of that term, but it definitely goes back a long way that, this problem with the dangers of inhaling dust, you talk about the coal industry way back in the day. And then also even the cannabis space, I wrote about in Burn After Reading that there was studies in the 60s investigating hemp workers in Spain and some of the breathing problems they had with large scale hemp production. So anytime you're kicking any kind of dust up into the room, kind of regardless of what it is, you don't really have to have a PhD to assume that it's not great to be breathing in. So we definitely need more research, but there is already a lot of research on the table that, that number one, this could be a kind of a general harm for workers, no matter what their health. One of the GTI workers was quoted, I believe, by it was either Cannabis Business Times or Weed Weeks or maybe Green Market Report. I'm not sure which one, but they quoted a worker talking about how they're completely healthy, how they go for runs all the time. They have completely healthy lungs, and yet they have problems in the pre-roll production room. And then there's also people who might have pre-existing conditions. COPD is what the worker at GTI is believed to have. Or also just kind of undiagnosed allergies or unknown allergies to the plant too. So, we see a lot of workers complain of kind of mild symptoms when it comes to this stuff, being around plants or being around pre-roll production in particular. But it's clear that sometimes it's more serious stuff at play, and that we need kind of full-scale investigation. And until we know more, that I think a lot of these larger companies should really approach this with a lot more caution and treat this as a serious issue. And understand that at the end of the day, they're responsible for their workers' well-being. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah, for sure. So, so let's switch gears into the Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I'll call it the New England or semi-New England industry.
Yep.
Yeah. So what's going on in the state of Massachusetts? I know there's some news that just dropped just recently, like tonight or today, really, right?
So yeah, it was happened. It was kind of buried in a meeting on Friday. The CCC has been doing in Massachusetts. We have to be specific now because both Rhode Island and Mass have a CCC now. But Massachusetts CCC is right in the middle of a regulatory review. They've been talking about community host agreements, kind of municipal equity, and also agent suitability. So kind of three big topics. They've been working through it. On Thursday, they had an 8-hour meeting. At the end of that meeting, it was kind of a bizarre exchange between the chair and the executive director. The chair asked the executive director if he had an announcement to make, and he said not at that time because he still wanted to speak to the rest of the commission, but we didn't get any details on what that announcement would be. Flash forward to the next day where they had a continuation of this meeting, and the executive director wasn't present at the time, but right in the middle of this discussion, the chair said she had something that wasn't on the agenda, basically, but she wanted to discuss, and she announced that the executive director would be resigning, and that he would be taking family leave starting Monday, basically today. And that at the end of the family leave, he would be resigning. So that came as a shock, mostly because it wasn't news that was delivered by the executive director himself. It was kind of a weird situation where the chair made this public at a public meeting. Now there's a public meeting laws that prevent more than two commissioners from discussing anything in a private setting. So it's kind of hard for them to have these group discussions, but there is executive session where they can go into a private session as well. So I think the reaction from the rest of the Cannabis Control Commission was kind of shock and confusion as towards why this news was being announced in this particular manner. We still don't really have a lot of answers. The CCC itself has declined. The press team there has basically will not confirm or deny that he resigned because it's a personnel issue. So they're not talking about it. He has not released a statement. The chair has not released a statement. So more questions than answers right now, but the bottom line is it seems like the executive director has left. The one nuance is that I forgot to mention is that the chair, when she was announcing this, also said that he had originally told her in May that he planned on taking family leave in September and then resigning at the end of the year. She asked him not to do that because there's, as she claimed, there's a lot of important work that needs to get done. He apparently agreed to that, and then on last Thursday told her, actually, I'm going to resign, and my family leave starts Monday. That's according to the commissioner, the chair of the commission, Shannon O'Brien. But those are all the details we have at the moment. So a very bizarre situation on the heels of a lot of scandals that have gone on with the CCC that we can also get into.
Yeah,
But
can
yeah,
you
it's definitely
please get into
chaos.
that? Because I'm
Yeah,
sure I know there's stuff that kind of led up to this. This doesn't just happen on a whim. So
right.
what was all that background that you think might have led to this?
Yeah, so it's hard to say why he resigned in particular. I want to be fair to him to a certain extent because he was in the position since 2017. There has been discussions about what the process would be to replace him when he eventually left. They've come to all acknowledge that he was going to leave at some point. So it wasn't really so much that he left that was shocking. It was kind of the manner that was announced. But yeah, it's definitely a chaotic time for the commission. I think it's hard to argue that. Some of the main problems is there's been accusations that some of the inspection teams have been, harsh on some of the licensees, have been unfair, have possibly retaliated against licensees that have spoken out against them.
Mm.
So there's been some accusations in that regard. There's always been questions about social equity and whether the state's going far enough in that regard too, as they continue to try to have more people in the industry that have been harmed by the war on drugs. So there's been a lot going on behind the scenes to the point where the state legislature in Massachusetts is actually considering putting a bill out there that would put an auditor within the CCC. This is something they've done with other agencies in Massachusetts that have kind of had scandals or have had issues over the years. And that would be an effort to make sure that, the investigation team is acting appropriately and that state funds are being used appropriately and stuff like that. So we're in an interesting position because the Cannabis Control Commission is asking for more funding in from the state budget. At the same time, the legislature is considering that and also possibly putting an auditor within the commission. So there's been a lot going on. There's also been some mediation behind the scenes between the commission and the staff. I think one important thing to remember is that the commission itself, despite being the commissioners of the Cannabis Control Commission, the 5 commissioners, they don't oversee the day-to-day operations. They basically are in charge of the executive director, and he's the one that actually oversees the commission. So there's been a lot of times where the commissioners themselves may not know something's going on. I think the most obvious example was Lorna McMurray, the worker who passed away at True Leaf. They didn't know about that situation until months later when it came out in the press. So that was kind of the most potent example of how sometimes there's kind of a disconnect between the day-to-day operations within the commission and the commissioners themselves. So there's a lot at play here. It's a very complicated situation, and obviously a lot going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. But yeah, I think it's going to continue to be an interesting story to keep our eyes on throughout the summer.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like there's some sort of internal communication issue there, but it's probably kind of the way that it's set up where you can only get no more than 2 commissioners together to discuss anything. That complicates it. And then I wonder about this auditor. Is that a appointed person, or who decides who that person will be, and what their credentials are, and how they're able to communicate with the commissioners. I just feel like we set these systems up so complicated that it's really hard to get stuff done. And part of me is like, is this on by design? And the other part of me is that because we just don't know any better, and we just duplicate what we've done in the past because we're afraid to be creative or afraid to fuck up. So
Right.
so yeah, that's disappointing. That's disappointing. And I do remember when Shawn came in 2017. I haven't been able to really follow much about him. I don't know much about him, but I wish him the best of luck, whatever happens next. And I do hope that this doesn't negatively impact people that are in that kind of process of getting their licenses renewed, or the social equity applicants. How will it impact them? The funding, It's been my understanding that the funding has been slow, if at all any. I don't know if you've got a different insight on that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the Social Equity Trust Fund has had some early hiccups, I guess you could call them. They are supposed to have millions of dollars at their disposal based on tax revenue, and right now things are still basically getting set up, and it won't be until next calendar year that they actually have full access to their funds. Now, it is every year they should be getting access to a certain percentage of the tax revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be a substantial amount of money in the account eventually, but as we know, a lot of people in the space have been waiting, a long time for this money. So, it is there is a sense of urgency, or there at least there should be for this issue. But right now, the Social Equity Trust Fund doesn't nearly have enough money to actually perform the tasks that they need to do in terms of doling out this money, and they're still trying to figure out exactly how this is going to work. Whether the majority of these funds are going to go to people who are already existing operators in the social equity space, or whether it's going to be new licensees. I know a lot of the existing operators certainly could use that cash and want that. So it becomes an interesting discussion of how many people do we kind of allow into the lifeboat, so to speak, and at what point are we spreading the money too thin that it can't have a real impact? So, these are some of the toughest questions it's going to have with these social equity trust funds. I know New York has a similar initiative. Rhode Island
Mm-hmm.
is trying to get a similar initiative off the ground. Obviously, it sounds like a great idea in principle, and I think it's something that is worth pursuing. But the devil really is in the details in terms of some of these questions.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And that, so you brought up Rhode Island, our the state to the south of us,
Mhm.
um, that has always had some political issues when it comes to grifting and and money disappearing. Um, so I'm wondering, how's the state of Rhode Island doing? I really have not followed them very closely.
Yeah, so it's been interesting. As you mentioned, yes, it's famously a state that has corruption issues. There's a famous article back from the early 20th century called Rhode Island, a State for Sale, that kind of documented how, politicians were literally buying votes back then. And it's been like that ever since. It's a very small state. It's been a one party state for as long as anybody can remember, basically. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I went to school down at University of Rhode Island, so that's where I got my first exposure to drug policy reform through Students for Sensible Drug Policy at the University of Rhode Island. So I'm very familiar with the state. I took a history of Rhode Island class back in school, and actually one of my poli sci professors was a Rhode Island legislature who was actually famous for wearing a wire for the FBI to help bust a bunch of corrupt state politicians. So, so there's a lot of interesting stories in Rhode Island politics and history, and I think this latest chapter is the cannabis space. They've been pushing for a while. They were actually the first state on the East Coast to have medical marijuana. They were they were the first state on the East Coast to have medical dispensaries as well. And this was still back in the Bush administration, going into the Obama administration, where dispensaries were being raided and illegal state businesses were still kind of under threat from the DEA and the federal government in terms of actually having their stores raided. So Rhode Island was kind of first with medical, but because they don't have a ballot initiative process in the same way that Massachusetts does, at least, it took them a while to get legalization through the legislature. They finally did it in 2022. And now we're at the point where existing medical operators have basically been allowed to start doing adult use sales. But the Cannabis Control Commission of Rhode Island was just formed. It is actually a 3-member commission instead of the 5-member commission that we have here in Massachusetts. And they've just started a listening session where they're going to begin crafting their regulations to give out additional licenses, including some of which are reserved for social equity applicants and some of which are reserved for worker cooperatives. So that's one exciting piece of good news from Rhode Island. But yeah, they have a lot of work to do. And unfortunately, they're getting a very big head start to some of their existing medical operators, many of them who are big MSOs or have been kind of had a monopoly over the space for a while. So it's going to be an uphill battle for some of these new license holders when they eventually come online.
Yeah, yeah, I can believe it. I mean, I feel like we in Massachusetts, we pushed back on letting medical companies get that kind of first bid on the adult licenses, and
Mhm.
I believe New York similar, and maybe a couple of other states. And Rhode Island was like, "Nah, we're just gonna we're just
We
gonna
have to
let
start
them."
before we even give out licenses, which is, I think at least the Cannabis Commission was formed here in Massachusetts before they started adult use sales.
Mm,
In Rhode Island, they actually started them before they even formed the commission. So yeah, I think they're going to have about a 2-year head start over the retail applicants that are going to come online in the second wave. So yeah.
yeah. Well, we'll see how that pans out in Rhode Island. Like I said, my focus is on home grow and making sure that anything that we can do to protect that, especially when we go to descheduling, which I hope is where it goes, not putting it on, at a different schedule, but taking it off the scheduling plate altogether, and allowing for people to grow. Um, and I understand that there will probably always be some sort of a plant count limitation and some sort of stipulations around home grow, but there should at least be some room for that, without having to, I believe, put your name on an application and to identify yourself, because I think that's a really big hurdle for people who may be gun owners or who just don't want their privacy, don't want to put their name down on something like that because they just don't know what it will be used for a job or whatever it might be. um, so we'll see what Rhode Island does. um, but I think the other thing was that we wanted to talk about, and my light just went off on my it's my my plant's like, it's time for bed, Asia.
Time for bed. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that I'm going live at 8:30, sorry, 7:30 instead of 11:30 a.m., I got to remind myself to change my timer so that doesn't happen next week. Um, but then I saw, just what was it, last week or so, that Mastercard decides, oh, we didn't know that we were accepting cannabis related capital or funding, or well, cash rather, and now we don't want to do that anymore, so we're pulling the plug. What's going on there, and is it realistic for them to be able to do that at this stage?
Yeah, it's funny, people think we have come a long way, but I think this incident has shown how vulnerable cannabis businesses are, especially on the finance side of things. This has kind of required me to do. I mean, I'm not a finance guy, but it kind of has required me to do the crash course into, what Mastercard even is. And we see their logo on all our cards, but exactly how their business works. Basically, they have relationships with banks and things of that nature in terms of to kind of use their system and to use their logo. um, and also do a crash course in how some of these payment processing works, because we're talking about debit pin and cashless ATM and ACH and all this stuff. So basically what's happened is, yeah, MasterCard has said no more cannabis transactions on our networks. And as people know, it's basically, they're a global business. It's basically them and Visa. And both of these companies have expressed this in the past, that they're aware these activities are going on and they weren't going to tolerate them. But this crackdown is actually has some teeth. I went to a dispensary over the weekend to check it out, do some investigative journalism myself, and try to use my
Hmm.
Mastercard. And sure enough, it did not work. So
Really?
yeah. So
That quick?
it has some teeth. They've definitely cracked down. There's been some times in the past where we've seen this with some of the cashless ATM systems. For those who don't know, this is kind of a workaround that some of the cannabis businesses use, where basically instead of being a normal debit transaction like you would do at the grocery store, it basically mimics an ATM where for the computer's purposes, you're basically taking out cash and then handing the cash directly to the company.
Mm.
So that way, it kind of gets around some of these rules and skirts the regulations. We've seen some of the companies that offer those services in the past kind of get shut down or have to stop operating, and we've seen a few businesses here and there get hit. But this has had a huge impact, including for Dutchy, who's like the number one POS system, e-commerce system in the cannabis space. They are kind of rapidly trying to switch to a crypto-based solution, because that's their best option right now. So yeah, it's caused a lot of chaos and is kind of pushing consumers back to cash. And when that happens for dispensaries, it can have a huge impact on their bottom line. Not only do they have to go get an ATM and put it in their lobby now and and have to deal with all this physical cash that has to be stored properly and moved around. But
Mm.
also, when consumers have a card, they're not limited to how much money they have in their wallet, so they're more likely to grab that extra item or kind of make that impulse buy at the counter. So it actually has a huge impact on their bottom line too. So again, this is just a huge reminder that it's kind of one step forward, one step back in the cannabis industry for a lot of issues, and kind of the financial issues is at the top of that list.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of people who may be on fixed incomes or retirees, and they kind of lean on that credit card limit to be able to get a little bit more, depending on how they might feel, at that state. I can just think of a couple of some family friends that I have, that unfortunately spend hundreds of dollars at the dispensaries, and I assume, I don't dig into their finances, but I assume that they're using a debit card or a credit card of some manner. If you're doing $400 or $500 a month, and you're on some sort of a fixed income, you need that extra little bit of credit to get your medicine. um, it's going to have I think a horrible impact on the consumer too, as well as the companies. And then the move towards Bitcoin. um, I did see that, and you mentioned that in your last write up, that Dutchy was looking to move to get into Bitcoin. But there's been so much pushback from the federal government on crypto lately. The SEC suing a few different tokens, or and calling them securities. Um, Ethereum. I know Bitcoin did not get pulled into the fray on that, and I think maybe if they stick to Bitcoin, they might be able to make something work, or a Litecoin, but I don't know if that's even a possibility. So, yeah, that was a shocker for me. I, I mean, Mastercard has a lot. Like you said, it's just Mastercard and Visa. That's really all you
Right.
see. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah. It was pretty shocking. Again, we've seen some of this in the past with some of these financial institutions getting shut down, kind of temporary hiccups here and there, but this feels a lot more permanent. And people are hoping that safe banking would fix this, but even safe banking doesn't actually legalize cannabis or legalize cannabis transactions, so that wouldn't even necessarily force Mastercard to play ball with the cannabis industry. So this is a tough issue, and I don't see any solution to it anytime soon.
Wow. Yeah, and the fact that Safe Act doesn't touch that
Mm.
is even more concerning.
Yeah.
I mean, it does create a more of a case for the need for things like Bitcoin, but it, there's so much that's against that. The system is really trying to create its own digital currency, and push away from Bitcoin. And if the same controllers of Mastercard are now controlling a new digital currency, I would assume they're going to play ball the same way and not allow for cannabis and psychedelics to be a part of that transaction. So that's disappointing. Um,
Mm.
but that's why grow our own, for for those types of situations where you can't rely on the government or these institutions to be consistent,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, anything else you wanted to share with the audience before we wrap up?
No, not really. Thank you to everybody who supported me so far. If you haven't checked it out, it's burnafterreading.blog. Every Friday, you'll get a free newsletter from me. And then I also have bonus content for paid subscribers. And I'm actually doing a sale right now. So if you get on there by Friday, you go to burnafterreading.blog/sale. You can get a discount on a yearly subscription. So, I try to, put out content for everybody and keep everybody informed. And it's really meaningful to me when people support my work through a paid subscription. But either way, I really appreciate the support. It's been interesting because I've been going to these cannabis events for a long time, and I was kind of a anonymous face in the crowd for many years, and now I actually go out and people recognize me and come up to me and talk to me about my work, and that's really the thing that keeps me going. So.
Yeah, that's cool. That's what's up. And I did put a link for the sale, the Burn After Reading sale, for those of you that want to become a subscriber, get access to this, to additional content. I'm a subscriber myself, so I can attest to the, it's worth it to pay for this type of journalism. that is something that you're not going to get in the mainstream, coverage from a perspective of someone who's been in the industry since he graduated from college. For those of you that might have missed that, Eric's been in this for a bit, and he's dedicated a lot of his, postgraduate time to the space. So he has quite an insight that he brings to the table when he's writing all of these different articles. And I like the way I enjoy reading your blog as well, which is also nice. There's not a lot of blogs that I actually enjoy reading. But no. So if you want to find a link to this, in YouTube, you're watching this on YouTube. If you go to the details section that describes what we're talking about today, at the bottom, there's a link to check out Burn After Reading and for yourself. And also there's Cat of the Week. How's that going? Because I feel like the Cat of the Week,
Yes.
you're like, somebody adopt a cat.
Yes. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I try to bring a bit of levity to my work too. That was another thing I noticed in the cannabis space, that there wasn't many people, doing that and bringing a little humor, bringing a bit of. I think I always try to keep from perspective with my work and realize there's a bigger world out there, and that cannabis fits into that bigger world, and it's not the whole thing. So part of that is having the Cat of the Week, where I feature whatever my favorite cat of the week is. Sometimes it's a historical cat, sometimes it's a reader cat. Definitely submit your cat if you're a reader. But a lot of times it's one of the cats that's available at the local shelter where I got my own cat, Brockton. Unfortunately, after the pandemic, there's been kind of a slowdown in the adoption rate, so they have many cats available. So if you're in the Massachusetts area, check out Bay Path Humane. But wherever you are, I'm sure there's some cats for adoption. So keep an eye out. And I think there seems to be a large amount of crossover between cannabis consumers and cat lovers. So I think cats have a very similar vibe to us cannabis consumers. So.
Yeah, we do have our own vibe. That Venn diagram exists. So well, thank you very much, Eric, for joining. I hope that you could come back again. Especially as the news kind of develops, depending on how things go. There's so much going on in this space. I really appreciate having your insight to share with the Trella audience. As I mentioned, I'm on the tech side, I'm on the cultivation side. I get my information from Eric, and I would much rather have Eric come on to talk about it than me. So thank you, Eric, for your time today.
Thanks for having me, AJ. I really appreciate it. I really love what you're doing with Trella and Grow Your Own and with the space. I appreciate you supporting cannabis media and creating some cannabis media of your own with this live. I love to see it. So yeah, happy to come on anytime you want me to talk about some of the latest cannabis news for sure.
Excellent. Good to know it. All right, Eric, I'll catch you on the other side.
Sounds good. Have a good one.
All right, bye-bye. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Trella Live. Again, I think I'm going to stick to this 7:30 time. I'm going to have to change my light schedule. I'm going to have to change my timer so it doesn't go off mid-show. But 7:30 on Monday. So catch us next week, same time. Again, we'll be talking about the grow trial, the plant. And I want to really open it up to more questions about that process, more questions about what we're going to be doing in the future. As I mentioned, I kind of teased it a little bit. I have there's a business model that we're creating that will be different from what you've seen in the past. Still working on all the details, the legalities of all these types of things. But if you are a caregiver who truly grows to give to others, please stay tuned. Please stay connected, because we got something for you. All right, everybody. Mad peace and love. I'll catch you next week.